It's a notion and education. And he very interestingly applies this to the Trump way of doing things, and has then started to think about how, as educators, we might respond to this version of populism. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Nicolas, who's going to talk about the affective mode of right-wing populism, Trump pedagogy, and lessons for democracy.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's always good to come back to the Institute. We've been thinking earlier with you, we've known each other for more than 15 years. We have many connections, so I'm really happy to talk to you today. So let me start by saying where I'm standing. And I've been doing research on emotional education for the past 20 years. I really look at education in a more interdisciplinary way, if you will. I've done work in peace education, citizenship education, human rights education, but I think those are kind of disciplinary boundaries. In everyday life, we don't make these distinctions, and so what I'm interested is how affect and emotion actually impact our lives as citizens and as educators, and what we can do about it. And so my work has been in this area for a long time, and my most recent interest is on the rise of extremist right-wing populism and fascists in Europe, in the United States, and many other countries around the world. And I claim, and I'm not obviously the only one who claims this, I claim that we cannot understand the rise of populism unless we look at the role of affect and emotion. So we have to look populism in relation to affectivity. And I will explain all these terms soon. So what particularly interests me are the affective investments of populist leaders and their supporters to nationalism, racism, sexism, and xenophobia. So I think it's naive to claim that supporters of populism are manipulated somehow by these leaders and they don't know what they are doing and we are smarter. There is something deeper than that. And so what group of scholars in recent years are exploring is how affect and emotion actually plays such a role. It's not the only factor, perhaps maybe not the most important factor, but definitely is one important factor, affectivity, in how populism and fascism plays such a big role in our lives. So, some of the driving questions that I've been working with, and what I'm talking about today, hopefully, is going to be like a chapter in my upcoming book on affect and the rise of populism. So I welcome any comments or suggestions you have. So can democratic education do something to combat extremist, right-wing populism and fascism? Do we have a role as educators to do something? And are there any prospects to further democratic education by engaging in a critical interrogation of the affective modes of right-wing populism? And I will explain what I mean soon by affective modes. But the underlying, the driving idea here is whether there is a role in democratic education, and I define democratic education in a very broad way. Education about, for, and through democracy. It's the same, there is a similar definition, if you will, for human rights education. Okay, so it's a very broad definition, And the assumption is that there is not one essentialist definition about democratic education. And if we remember Dewey from a century ago, democratic education has to find constantly ways to renew itself. So the question here is, what we live in recent years with the rise of populism is a crisis of democracy and a crisis of democratic education. So is there something that can be done? I'm talking about educators. I assume all of us are somehow educators in different levels of education in this room. So is there something that educators can do to make their contribution to the renewal of democratic education and by extension, democracy itself and democratic processes itself? So I leave you to read this quote and guess who said it. Hmm? Hmm? Oh, okay. So I had to put that in a quiz, but I guess. So Donald Trump, 1987, The Art of the Deal, from his book. So you can see the ethos and the attitude. And this is a more recent, from 2016. Okay, but notice here the emphasis on emotion and anger, especially anger, but not only anger, but love. So it's a point that I will be making later, but I allude to this now because it's not, we're not talking only about negative emotions like anger and resentment, which is usually the emphasis on, when you talk about populism. But there is also a lot of talk from populist leaders about love and how embracing, the nation, or embracing one state is an effective situation that can transcend, our present situation. So it's not only negative, but there is also great love for the country. It's a beautiful thing in many respects. And you notice, like in one small paragraph, there are 3 repetitions of anger. There is an interesting YouTube video I found recently on the analysis of Trump's language and like how he specifically repeats words, but he repeats them in a particular way, and how he places the emphasis in many of the meaning at the end of the sentence. So he restructures of his sentences, repeats a lot the same thing. So there is some people argue that it's not nonsense. There is a strategy behind the way he talks to people. And obviously, this talk is very effective because he touches people in a unique way. So this is something to keep in mind, how language and emotion are kind of entangled in a way that produces political results, the politicization of language and affect. Yes. The facial expression, like the way he pronounces words, the emphasis at the innuendos and everything. So, this is the claim, as I said, the rise of right-wing populism and its consequences cannot be fully understood without examining the role of RPG. I'm not the only one saying this. There's a growing work from many disciplines, especially in sociology, political science, and communications. Now, the relevance of affective emotion in social and political processes and movements is not something new, of course. And I will talk about later that there is a lot of work from the 80s and the 90s is a growing research in this area. So what is new is the notion of modes of affectivity. When we say modes of affectivity, we mean the interactive forms, the mediated spaces, the patterns of affective dynamics, how affectivity is intertwined with language and discourse, with power structures, and with hierarchies. And these modes of affectivities obviously change from historical context to cultural context and so on. So if we want to study Trump's modes of affectivity, well, we need to look at Trump in the historical context of the United States right now. The same Boris Johnson, if you want to look at his modes of affectivity, and there might be similarities, but it has to be contextualized and it has to be historicized. So it's not just a kind of discursive analysis. It's actually a politicized analysis of how affectivity and power entangle. So if we go back to the two quotes by Trump, the questions we could ask are, in what specific ways is Trump's political mobilization of people carried out by an interplay of emotional appeal and affective disposition? How he appeals emotionally to his supporters, and what are the affective underpinnings and implications of what Zembylas called Trump pedagogy? And I adapt here, I find a very nice way of emphasizing that Trump, as much as we may dislike what he does or how he does it, there is a pedagogy behind what he does. He pedagogizes his supporters in particular ways. And so the question is how he does that, what we can learn from it, and how we can deconstruct it or problematize it. So Trump pedagogy is how Trump popularizes, spreads, and normalizes speech that is supposed to be hard-hitting, honest, and reflective of the common interest, but is actually hate speech and a rejection of global equity and human rights. So the purpose of my talk is to argue that the critical inquiry into the phenomenon of populism can provide opportunities for enriching democratic education and to explore teachers and students may invent pedagogical spaces of affective counter-politics. That is, spaces at the micro-political level, because this is realistically what teachers can do, what educators can do in primary, secondary, higher education sectors at the micro-political level to instill what Anderson and others call hopeful criticism. That is not negative criticism of populism, because most of the times critiquing populism entails a lot of negativity. It's all, oh, this doesn't work, or look how they think, and so on. But actually, to produce something hopeful out of this critical exercise, out of this critical interrogation. Now, feel free to, I didn't say it from the beginning, but please feel free to interrupt me if you want any clarifications. Don't leave all the questions in the end. We don't know how much time we have at the end, because we had to leave with you. So, I'll say a few things about populism, the affective roots of populism. I will dissect a little bit Trump pedagogy and the affective elements of this pedagogy, and then I will conclude with a few ideas, pedagogical interventions for renewing democratic education. So, populism. There is a lot of debate um, in uh, in the literature what populism is. Is it an ideology? Is it a movement? Or is it simply a rhetorical logic? And you have like endless debates. If you look at the literature, it's besides the point. The point here is that there are some core attributes that it's important to have in mind. And the first one is an understanding of society by populists as a unitary body that is divided into two fractions, the people and the elites. So there's a clear division, a clear distinction between the pure people and the corrupted elites. Populist politicians and parties claim to be the exclusive representatives of the people. So they say, I speak for the people. This is a usual rhetorical scheme of populism that they represent pure people and everybody else is corrupt. And the fight against the corrupted elites is considered by populists as a moral battle. Now, notice this is an important point that is made by some scholars that the political is moralized. And this has important consequences because when you talk about the good and the evil, the good people and the bad people, then political conflicts become moralized conflict. And this depoliticizes the discussion. And this has important consequences. So this is something that populist leaders often do. That is, this is a battle between the good and the evil. And the good, as we have to prevail over the corrupted elites. Now, there is not only one kind of populism. There are actually many types of populism. There is right wing and there is left wing. So there is also left wing populism, not only right wing. I'm interested more in left wing populism. And so the characteristics of the left of the right wing populism is that it's nationalist, racist, xenophobic, and homophobic rhetoric. There is pure people versus corrupted. There's usually social, religious, or ethnic groups who threaten the purity of the nation state. You hear the same similar kind of rhetoric in Italy, in Greece, in Cyprus, in the UK about the foreigners, the immigrants, the refugees who come to and threaten the purity of the nation state in many ways, economically, culturally, and otherwise. And so people are mobilized around an opposition to the enemy. So the immigrants are the enemies here. Also, the liberal people who support them are also the enemies because they don't care about the purity of the nation. They threaten, along with the immigrants, the purity of the nation. So this is a kind of rhetoric of national populism, of right-wing populism. One of the theorists, political scientists who wrote extensively and has influenced a lot the literature of this is Ernesto Laclau. And his book from 2005 is classic because he made this distinction between the logic of difference and the logic of equivalence. What is this? That social agents have different demands, which are usually claimed through normal social and political processes. The process of negotiation in politics is very normal. Or you construct alliances and coalitions. Now, when does populism arise? It arises when a large number of those demands remain unfulfilled for a long time, and a political leader emerges, maybe a charismatic one, maybe a less charismatic one, but who feels the people, and he or she manages to emerge in the political scene and portray all of these demands as equivalent and undifferentiated. So this is the logic of equivalence. Everything becomes muddled in one frame. So it doesn't matter whether there are different demands. Everything is neutralized in a way, and under this kind of logic of equivalence, everything becomes equivalent. There is no difference. So this is one quote that to ask oneself if a movement is or is not populist is to start with the question. All movements are populist. The question is, to what extent are they populist? Some of them are less, some of them are more. And the second quote is about actually their impact and the role of affect. Affect is the very essence of investment, while its contingent character accounts for the radical component of it. There is no populism without effective investment in a partial option. So, now, as I said earlier, the role of emotion and affective politics and political movements has been studied for a long time. It's not a new thing. Every political movement and every critical project is driven by affects. So the point is not whether or not it's relevant, but how it is involved. And there is some recent work by a group of sociologists of emotion dissecting the entanglement between emotion and right-wing populism, also left-wing populism in other papers. And they came up with the conclusion that resentment, one, and shame and other negative emotions like anger are the major emotions driving the appeal, the emotional appeal of populism. So people feel resentment for various reasons, and then with the logic of equivalence, everything becomes muddled under one claim by populist leaders, and they take advantage of people's resentment for maybe corruption, for social injustice, for whatever, for immigrants flooding in the country, for various kinds of claims, and shame. And I will, here is a quote by a recent book by Ali Hochschild, who coined the term emotional labor a couple of decades ago. This is like the most recent book, Strangers in Their Own Land. And she basically did an ethnographic study, 2 years, of Tea Party supporters in the United States, in the Deep South. So she spent a lot of time with trying to understand what makes these people supporting Tea Party, right-wing movement in the US, and especially Donald Trump. And here is a quote about Trump being an emotions candidate, more than any other presidential candidate that was doing the presidential campaign before he was elected. Focuses on eliciting and pressing emotional responses from his fans rather than on detailed policy prescriptions. He doesn't talk about policy prescriptions ever. His talk is very emotional. His speeches evoking dominance, bravado, clarity, national pride, personal uplift, inspire an emotional transformation. Not only does Trump evoke emotion, he makes an object of it, presenting it back to his fans as a sign of collective success. And I will share two exchanges. This is a collection of Donald Trump's comments on immigrants. You know, the famous kind of comments that they are rapists, they're coming to our country to, and so on, they have AIDS. And so it's an interesting collection just to give you
President, this is the latest in a long list of racially incendiary remarks from Donald Trump. Here's a few of his insensitive comments, many coming after he started his campaign for the nation's highest office. Back when he announced his candidacy, the day he announced his candidacy in 2015, he made inflammatory remarks about Mexican immigrants. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. All right, of course, you're talking about Haiti. According to the New York Times, he complained that the 15,000 Haitian immigrants who received visas in 2017 all have AIDS. In that very same meeting, the Times reports, he said that once the 40,000 Nigerian immigrants given visas arrived in the U.S., they would never go back to their huts. The White House denies this report. During the presidential election, he referred to a strong mother saying, "Look at his wife. She was standing there, just standing there. She had nothing to say. She probably maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say. Why being silent because of the family's Muslim faith?" Candidate Trump also went after a U.S. district judge who presided over fraud allegations against Trump University, citing the judge's Mexican heritage. We're building a wall. He's a Mexican. We're building a wall between here and Mexico. The answer is he is giving us a very unfair world. I know White House ceremony recently honoring Navajo code talkers. The president used a nickname for Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Elizabeth Warren that many people may have found offensive. You were here long before any of us were here. Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. All right, early last year, he asked journalist White House correspondent April Ryan if she could help him set up a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus. Are you going to include the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus? Do you want to set up a meeting? Do you want to set up a meeting? No. And during the presidential debate, he generalized the lives of minority communities. African Americans, Hispanics are living in hell because it's so dangerous. You walk down the street, you get shot.
And there is another interesting exchange. Yeah, with a journalist from CNN.
One of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign, in the terms that here we go. That if you know, I was president, that this caravan wasn't engaged. I was not president, caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving out of Central America to the U.S. And why did you characterize it as such? As I consider it an invasion, you and I have a difference. Do you think that you demonize immigrants? Yeah, this election. I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. They have to come into a process. I want it to be a process. And I want people to come in and we need to be. Your campaign, why we need the people? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people. Your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls. But they weren't actors. They're not going to be doing that. No, it's good. You think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. These were people. This was an
this is how some of the theories of affect and emotion are trying to make sense of this. This is Ben Anderson. He's been writing a lot about non-representational theory, post-humanist perspectives on affect and emotion. And he says that perhaps Trump gives people permission to have fun again in a mood and situation of too serious crisis ordinariness, permission to enjoy their resentment and grievances, permission to enjoy hate. There is a lot of work recently talking about the entanglement of power and affect. That affective power works by opening possibilities for new relations and potentials, such as, for example, for a better life with less fear and anxiety. And this is what Trump is trying to make, provide a life, provide a message to his supporters that is, more with more pride, less shame, and less fear and less anxiety. And affective politics do not only work through negative emotions. This is an important point. That is, it's not only about anger and resentment, but also through positive ones, such as the promise of redemption, hope, and love for one's country, which is exactly what Trump is trying to give his supporters. He doesn't care about policy or policy pronouncements. That's why he's a master of emotional appeal. So, what is Trump pedagogy? Trump's pedagogical dynamic legitimates affects and emotions such as anger and resentment, but also hope and redemption for his supporters. It would be a mistake, therefore, to fall into the tendency and think that Trump's supporters are merely manipulated through negative emotions. And if we fall into this trap, I think we will misread the complexity of the situation. Trump's tactics catalyze into personal and transformative emotional processes of hope and redemption. So there's a lot of talk in his rhetoric about giving hope, make America great again, and redemption from past shame that his supporters have been feeling. So there are two important features in his pedagogical approach. The first one is the ideological and moral division of us, the good people, and then the evil classic populist mechanism. And the second one, affective investments, nostalgia for a great and glorious ethnic past to make America great again. And there has been a lot of analysis of his talks, and this is like a theme that goes, but I mean, in almost every speech that he gives in campaign, and he's campaigning all the time. He hasn't stopped campaigning for 4 years. So it's not like other presidents who have been campaigning close to the election. This guy has been tirelessly campaigning almost every day, trying to bring people together. And his gatherings are like, big parties where people, feel good. They go there to feel good and hear something that would make them feel. So his pedagogical tactics, what we call his sexism and racism, they pedagogize his supporters into a certain type of social relations. And successful pedagogical tactics because they resonate his supporters' affective dispositions and investments. He gets the feeling of the people and he feeds back to them what they like to hear. And he does it well. we may not like what he says, we may consider it sexist and racist and hate speech, but it makes his supporters feel good. And this is something we should take seriously into consideration. So, you may ask now, so what? If we understand Trump pedagogy as merely a set of sexist ideas or racist ideas in other words, then I think we risk missing the reproduction of effective investments that allow Trump supporters to appear even stronger by way of enacting these ideas in their everyday life as racist practices. And I've been reading just a few days ago an interesting statistic that there has been a rise of bullying incidents in American schools after Trump was elected. Because some people, one reason, some students may feel more that they have a license to behave like their role model. So, obviously, it's hard to make a scholarly academic connection, a kind of cause-effect relationship between these two. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence about this, and it's something at least we should look into. Bullying incidents in schools and how they somehow are related with the effective investments that people make. So there are new openings for democratic education to explore the different modes of articulation of populism within specific circumstances. It will look very different, I would guess, not only between the UK and Italy, but even within different areas in the UK, the south and the north of the UK, or Scotland and Wales. To pay close attention to how populist affective styles as rhetorical devices to invoke the logic of equivalence, and to create spaces for critical dialogue that acknowledges how and why different people articulate themselves effectively in certain ways, and what can be done to respond productively to those affective investments. So this is kind of the general theoretical ideas. Let me try to be a bit more specific. Democratic education obviously cannot stop populism. I think it would be unfair and unrealistic, to be honest, to make a claim that education could stop populism. But it can certainly work with disaffected people who have been alienated from traditional politics to enact democracy in a new ways. And this is not a new idea. We've been talking about ideas in human rights education and citizenship education for many, many years. What is new is this attention, I would guess, on the role of affect and emotion and the affective investments that people make, and we should take them seriously. So democratic education can indeed make a contribution at the micro-political level to cultivate hopeful criticism. How? I'll try to share two ideas, and I'm sure you can come up with many more. So the first one is to identify how affective dynamics work micro-politically to organize people's responses to trans racism, sexism, and xenophobia. In other words, under which circumstances there can be an antidote to the affective ideology of right-wing populism and its practices in everyday life. And to give you even more explicit an example, we get amused by jokes, but it's not a joke. So if we just make fun of, look at this guy, he's stupid, he's saying this nonsense, this racist thing, oh, people do not take him seriously, his time will come and it will pass. It's not like that. I think that would be an underestimation of the complexity of the situation. So what we can do, open up critical spaces for examining positive and negative effects and emotions of those who feel attachment. Why some people are attracted to his message or populist leaders' message. Why, and if you look at it, at least this is what Ali Hochschild in her book managed to show, is that communities feel disaffected. So the question is how, at the micro-political level, obviously we cannot change the whole country, but at the micro-political level that we work at the university or the secondary history classroom or citizenship classroom and so on, why some people feel disaffected. They feel disaffected by the economic decline, they may feel isolated, and that's why the message of populist leaders is so appealing. So what can be done to break this bond and to problematize this bond? I mean, we're not going to change, obviously, all the complexities, but at least if we understand some of those, then we can provide and create spaces for renewing democratic education. And this is the kind of the simplest message I can give you today. Number two, negative critique is necessary, but it's not enough. We are often consumed and consume all our energy in providing negative critique of why Trump is so racist, why populist leaders are so xenophobic, and they have so negative consequences, all these talks in the country. And I'm saying this is not enough. We need what Rosie Totti and others call an affirmative critique. That is positive, hopeful stories of alternative belongings that embody in practice the hope for other futures. We need alternative messages that do not focus merely on the negative, but provide something positive in return. Example, to have students identify positive and hopeful narratives such as love for the world, which is not an acceptance of how things are, but an affirmation of the value of what we do in the present and thus of things that we value as worth passing on. The idea is to provide positive messages and hopeful messages and don't consume all our energy in negativity. And obviously, I'm not talking about superficial sentimentality, right? I'm talking about alternative stories and narratives that need to be created within the community to provide, alternative looks at reality and interpretations of it. Clearly, there are many risks in what I'm saying. One of them is that, well, how do you translate this conceptual analysis into a set of dispositions and practices that move and inspire educators and students, while recognizing that all education inevitably involves some sort of work on affect. I have always problematized this in my work. It's one of the things that I feel very uncomfortable with. I think all education, by definition, is affective education, either we admit it or not. So it's a form of, sometimes it becomes a form of ideological and political education. So the question is, where do you draw the line? And I think the line sometimes is very thin, and there are many dangers involved when you try to do this kind of work, when you stop doing, positive stuff, and then ideology begins, and propaganda begins. And so educators may be accused of politicizing democratic education, especially in the US. I've heard many of my colleagues have a hard time doing the kinds of comments, especially in secondary school classrooms in the US. So it's not easy to do what I'm saying here. You have to calculate, how far you can go, how many risks you can take as a teacher, if you take into consideration that there might be reactions from the community. And some people have tried to do it, and there have been reactions by the community. So, to end, what I try to say is that the rise of right-wing populism cannot be understood unless we look at the role of affective emotion. That negative critique of the affective ideology of right-wing populism is not enough for developing a productive counter politics, and an affirmative critique is also needed to quote what I set alternative frames and agendas which endorse and disseminate alternative concepts such as equality, diversity, and solidarity. So this is what I have to say. Thank you for your attention. I'm very happy to. We have a few minutes, right, Hugh?
Yeah, thanks very much. Great talk. And between us, you will take questions. So,
Or comments, or thoughts, or reactions, or feedback, or anything.
I have two short thoughts. One of them is I was at New Mexico at the end of last year.
Mhm.
Several have been paid.
Mhm.
And it's been a really interesting kind of dialogue with them in the sense that they are trying to agree on the things that we were talking about, but at the same time embracing new normality, because the detention camps have risen from 2 to 13 within a year and became part of the normality. So having that, as normality, that's what we do with the immigrants that come in legally and things like that. And the other point that is completely unrelated is a few years ago I was looking at democratic education in Portugal, and I became really immersed in dictatorship discourses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to hear you talking about Trump's discourses and things that at the theoretical level, there's a lot of commonalities between what he expresses and also many dictators have expressed over the years. I think the main difference now for me that is really interesting is that these new discourses are overtly divisive and legitimizers of hate, which is something that dictators in the past avoided because they played for the unity rather than division. So,
No, these are very, very good points. Very interesting points. Right. There has been, in fact, there is a lot of work in history and communications analyzing the affective styles of dictators like Hitler and other dictators, and the way that they communicate, especially Hitler, who was a master in terms of communicating with his organizing these huge rallies. And you actually see many similarities between the rallies of Hitler and the political campaigning that Donald Trump is doing, and how he communicates like with his people, asking questions, for example, or responding back. I mean, it's as much as I dislike him and his ideas, I have to say that the guy is not as stupid as I admit publicly that I thought the guy would never be elected. I was shocked when he was elected. And then I had to really dig and kind of reflect on, that there was a pattern that I didn't see and many other people didn't see, in how he he legitimizes many things that are overtly, sexist, racist, homophobic, and hate speech, completely hate speech. But he kind of, for the first time, like you said, so overtly and so powerfully, he legitimizes this kind of talk.
Did you? Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for anyway, two questions. In terms of
Mhm.
honestly, we are going to ignore the important role of the people in the curriculum we have. We only we focus on the cognitive. So how can we, my first question, how can we choose the principle based on when the third one is perception? The second question, so many scholars pay attention to or relational
Mhm.
activity, but for example, Bennett, he mentioned about personally, I think we need to focus on the goal, relational and but in terms of can we balance relational activity and affecting
Well, let me start with your first question, which is a big question. That it's true that at least initially, like many other disciplines, so it's not only kind of limitation of citizenship education. But initially, a lot of work was more cognitive oriented. I think there is a lot of work now in citizenship education, peace education, human rights education, acknowledging the role of affectivity. So I only think, the future is right open for new kinds of approaches that take into consideration the complexities of affectivity and emotion and what that means for pedagogical practices, because they do have a lot of consequences in terms of, and the simplest example I could give is that uh, is sentimentality. There is a lot of sentimental talk when you try to inspire people to take action, help refugees, or combat prejudice and racism and injustice. There is a lot of tendency to fall into sentimentalist talk, like a very superficial and cheap talk that if I move you into tears, um, then then I assume that you will do something about it. But now it's very well established that this is very superficial. So if I move you into tears because you watch a movie it doesn't mean necessarily that you will take action for social change. So what we need is a deeper affective engagement that creates solidarities, for example, that emphasizes, on how do we create affective solidarities and connections and networks that do not remain at a superficial, sentimental level. So I think there is a lot of growing work, and I expect to see more of that kind of work in upcoming years. Now, the second question, there is a lot of debates about, distinction made about intentionality and affectivity, and some do not actually make that distinction. And to be honest, I'm a bit skeptical about intentionality itself. How do you know, your intentions, other than you revealing them to me? And how do I know that? So instead of talking about intentionality or cognition, the emphasis, at least in affect theory in recent years, is, for example, on the notion of affective practices. And practice is something that actually you can see being enacted. So if, and it doesn't have the divisions between affect and cognition or affect and intentionality that other kind of theorizing has. So affective practice or affective discourses are or discursive practices are all ways of trying to, at least theoretically, but also ethnographically at least, trying to get past the limitations that you mentioned.
Good example would be some of the work of the Kennedy Center where they now done some videos on human rights defenders. And there have been schools in this country that have used that material, that human rights defenders and children in London kind of get a very strong emotional attachment to, for example, a LGBT campaign in Uganda. So miles away,
Yes.
but they recognize the struggle and the importance of this.
Excellent example. Yeah.
Yes. I'm not working in a related field, but what I was thinking when you were presenting, it seemed that currently we have a better populist communication. That's why there is this, the rising, the institutionalization of populist leader. But what I was thinking is that in my own country, I'm Italian, we had lots of populist leaders even in the past. So I was connecting, I mean, the rise of populists, not only to a better communication. I don't really see Trump as a really good communicator, is keeping with the past. I rather see as dramatic change in society. So possibly 60 years ago, we were close to, the bad things that happened during, the fascist era. So people didn't really want to believe or vote for someone that remind some bad thing of the past. Now, historically, I see differences, and possibly even economically, people are less included. Possibly the quality of education. I see change in society rather than in a better populist agenda, better populist communication. That is my point.
There's definitely been, there have been dramatic changes, especially, economic situation in the south of Europe, including Italy, Spain, Greece. So definitely something has changed, and historians, I guess, would tell you that things change all the time. There are changes all the time, but some changes are felt more dramatically and more powerfully and affect people in more powerful ways, perhaps, than in the past.
Yeah. That's why I was seeing that the only solution can be teach people.
Sure.
One really solve this.
No, you're right. Let me say this again. I don't think education will change the society. I never believed education would change society. But I do believe that education can make a contribution to changing the society. And it can make its small contribution along with many other social and political sectors of the society. So to expect from education that it would change the society would not only be unfair, but also unrealistic. Yeah. Yes.
I think that's what we hang on to times. I also like that second point that that it isn't enough to just be negative, and we've seen that in this country. With Brexit. people just wrote off communities, and they wrote off our now Prime Minister, a lot of people in the last election by saying he's stupid, things like that. Oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. He does. Steve Bannon's been around talking to all these people. They, they know they've got an agenda and they're picking up on things that they see in the States and so on. So, but I think it's understanding of why people do this. And I like that approach that you have about emotions. And I think that the progressive left have missed out on that. We have really missed out on that, to understand. And I think your work enables us to understand that and to do something about it, actually. So I'm very positive about it.
Thank you for that. Very positive. And there's a reason why we have to think properly, namely that Michelinos and I are examining a PhD at King's College in a few minutes' time.
Oh, right.
So we have to get there. There is a saying in showbiz, keep them wanting more. And I think it's clear that you would want more. Ideally, we would have gone on for another half hour and had a really interesting further debate. But we've had a tremendously stimulating input. You've got some of the references to Michelinos's work. You can look up all the other number of things that he's written. But this paper on Trump in particular, I think will be of great interest. So thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. And possibly, if you have a question, you can email Michelinos. I'm sure he would be prepared to respond.
There is a risk of legitimize Trump even academically. As we were saying,
Right. I don't think so. I mean, this is all about looking at counter strategies, isn't it? So by definition, he is the enemy, I suppose.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for organizing that.
Thank you very much.
Are they there?
You didn't. That's why I couldn't say hello. Something like that. Katerina. Hi, Katerina. How are you? Hi. Are you there? Yeah.
All right. Katrina, thanks for coming online.
Yeah. See you. I will. Oh, Katerina, go ahead. So, can you hear me? Can you? Hi. I'm still. Nice to meet you. Left the session.
You produced the post for our next meeting.
Yeah. I'm so happy you like it.
It circulated details yesterday.
Yeah.
I saw that. It's great. Yeah, thanks very much.
I tried to the poster into the message.
No.
And it looked, when I sent it, the poster was in the message. But when it
Oh,
arrived, it
that's
wasn't.
funny.
So I managed to second one to send.
Yeah.
Everyone in the doctor's school now.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. More people have that. Oh, good to take that step.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a lovely day. See you next month. Next month, right? The next session. See you next session.
I'd like, next week. Yeah. Well, we have, the last one.
Next session,
Yeah, 17.
last, 17.
Okay. Everything else all right? That's good, wasn't it? Very good.
That was really good.
I like
It's
it.
really good. That was really good.
Actually, I have a lot of
I
questions.
mean, I think he wants to talk to more people about his work and some politicians.